Hi, my name is Gary Ranch. I'm a restaurant manager here at the Moab Brewery. I'm going to be taking you guys through a brewery tour here at the Moab Brewery today. The Moab Brewery started brewing in May 5th, 1996. When the Moab Brewery first opened up, we only had 4 of these small fermenters. They're 15-barrel fermenters. Now we have over 18 fermenters on site, including 2 large 120-barrel fermenters out in the parking lot that are constantly in use. This is going to be an in-depth crash course on brewing, okay? So we're going to start with the first piece of equipment here. It's called the hot liquor tank. This hot liquor tank is essentially just full of hot water. It's boiling hot water, ready to use so that we can mash in with it at the lauter tun. What we do here is this is some Breeze malt and grain that they're going to put in the top of this lauter tun. We're going to add the hot boiling water to it. When it's in there, it's basically making like a big giant kettle of oatmeal, basically. It kind of goes through, it strains here through the bottom so that we can pull all of the fermentable sugars and proteins from the grain. Once we do that, we get all the fermentable sugars and proteins from the grain, we move from the lauter tun over to the brew kettle. With the brew kettle here in the background, what we do there is we can add more hops to it. We boil the impurities out of the wort. It's actually called wort at that time. From the brew kettle, once it's done brewing in that area, we move over to the heat exchanger. The main job of the heat exchanger is to cool down the wort from the brew kettle before it goes into the fermenter, so we don't shock the yeast inside of the fermenter. So it's basically like a big giant radiator. It brings city water in at 60 degrees Fahrenheit and passes through the veins and cools down the beer. We then recycle the city water that becomes boiling hot. We put it back into the hot liquor tank so that we can use it for the next brews. So we're recycling it and it's not just going down the drain. So from the bottom of the heat exchanger, we move over to the fermenter. The wort gets put into the fermenter. We then add the yeast to it, and then the yeast starts doing its job to make the beer. I'm going to explain a little bit about yeast. It's a live creature. Yeast has a couple of byproducts. One of the byproducts of yeast is CO2. This is the bubbles coming off of the CO2. They basically, all yeast does is it eats the sugar, it farts CO2, and it pees alcohol. They make babies, they reproduce, and that's what makes our beer. They create a lot of heat in there. They do their job really well. We use a strain of yeast anywhere from, I would say, 6 to 20 generations, depending on how strong that strain of yeast is in all of our beers. It's the exact same yeast in most all of our beers. All right, a couple more things I want to explain about these tanks. They're all glycol jacketed, so we can control the temperature in all of these tanks so that we can control the beer. We're constantly pulling off of this sight glass right here to measure the fermentable sugars that's left in the beer so that we can get the beer right at its desired gravity, which is 3.2 by weight, 4% by volume, or if it's a full strength beer, we can get it to 9% by volume or 8% by volume, wherever we want to come in on at it. Once the beer has reached its desired gravity, we can tell the yeast to stop doing its job. We basically change the temperature of the tank. The yeast clumps together in a big group and they fall to the bottom of the cone and they go all the way to the bottom. Then we extract the yeast off first from the fermenter and move it into the next fermenter, and we get ready for the next beer to be made. Okay? Throughout the brewing process, the brewers pull the wort from the tank right here with this little sample glass area, and they use what they call a hydrometer. This hydrometer, they drop inside here to measure the gravity of the beer, so that right when it reaches its desired gravity, we know when to shut the fermenter off, shut the fermentation off, so that we can then process the beer. Earlier, we hook a hose up there, we run the hose inside here and hook it up to our filter. The medium that we use to help filter inside this machine with the screens is called perlite. It's crushed seashells. They're really fine. What they do inside of this unit with the filter trays is it helps catch the yeast and any other particles that's left over in the beer so that it can come out completely clean. Now, as a home brewer, people usually know that beer usually cleans itself. The yeast will clean up the cloudiness of the beer, but we are in production of making beer and getting out to the table and our accounts as fast as possible, so we have to filter it with a giant filter. From this filter, it goes in here this side. You can see that it comes out clear. Once it's clear, it comes out this back side and heads right over to this bright beer tank. Once it goes from the filter, it goes right into this bright beer tank or serving tank. These tanks are glycol jacketed too. These are full of ready to drink beer. It's completely chilled to the temperature that we like, usually around 32 degrees Fahrenheit. We're gonna go ahead and pull some beer off of this. It's ready to drink, carbonated and ready to go. From the bright beer tank, we hook a hose up right here, or one of these hoses right here. This is where we keg all of our beer for our distribution and all of our accounts, or we hook a hose right up to here, right to our canning line.